Welcome back to Divine Light. Today we are standing in the silent aftermath of a fallen empire to explore Isaiah 11. It is the sound of new life emerging from total devastation. If you recall the end of chapter 10, the terrifying Assyrian Empire was violently chopped down by God like a massive forest. But unlike a mighty cedar that dies forever when cut, the house of David is compared to a stubborn oak. Even when it is cut down to a bare stump during the bitter years of exile, it retains a hidden, indestructible vitality, the deep roots of ultimate redemption. We begin with the spark of life at verse 1.
And there shall come forth a shoot out of the stump of Jesse, and a branch out of his roots shall bear fruit.
Why a shoot from Jesse and not the throne of King David? Think of this as the mystery of the stump. By the time the final redemption arrives, the royal dynasty won't look like a majestic tree anymore. It will be stripped of its crown, its wealth, and its obvious majesty. It will be cut all the way down to the roots, back to Jesse, who was just a humble shepherd. True rebirth doesn't come from a corrupted crown. It grows organically from the deep, hidden, humble roots of the nation. Notice the two words used here, a shoot, chota, and a branch, netza. The shoot is a rod of authority, outward physical leadership. But the branch, netza, implies something almost weedy, overlooked and actively scorned. It teaches that before his emergence, this ultimate leader is dismissed by the world, hidden in the obscure roots of history, waiting for the moment when the forest of human ego is cleared. He doesn't come from nowhere. He is born from the persistent stubbornness of a people who refuse to let their roots die. In verse 2, the anatomy of this leader is revealed.
And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord.
This isn't just a list of nice leadership traits. It is the architecture of a perfectly unified soul. Picture the ancient menorah. It had one central stem and 6 branches extending from it. The Spirit of the Lord is that central, unifying stem. From it grow 6 specific branches of divine energy, forming 3 paired opposites. First, wisdom and understanding, the balance of receiving divine inspiration versus generating deep analysis. Second, counsel and might, the flawless pairing of strategic planning and absolute execution. And finally, knowledge and fear of the Lord, the ultimate balance of deep intellectual intimacy with God and overwhelming awe. He represents the total rectification of the human soul. The supernatural intuition is described next in verse 3.
And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord, and he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither decide after the hearing of his ears.
This is the Edenic scent. The Hebrew word for delight shares a root with the word for smell. There is a stunning mystical connection here. In the Garden of Eden, the original sin corrupted almost every human sense. Eve saw the fruit, listened to the serpent, touched it, and tasted it. The only sense left uncorrupted was the sense of smell. Sight and hearing only process the external garments of the physical world, which can easily be faked. People can fake righteous actions for the eyes or speak manipulative words for the ears, but scent represents the pure, unhidden essence. This leader bypasses the illusions of history. He restores the broken logic of Eden by perceiving the raw, uncorrupted truth of a person's soul. The mechanism of justice follows in verse 4.
But with righteousness shall he judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the land. And he shall smite the land with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked.
Here is the weapon of truth. Throughout history, the greatest obstacle to redemption isn't just external empires. It's the internal mixed multitude of cynicism and corruption. This opposition is dismantled not with physical swords or violence, but with a truth so self-evident it shatters falsehood on impact. His words alone are the rod. Verse 5 gives the internal condition of the leader.
And righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins.
Imagine a man wearing a beautiful, flowing robe, but he has no belt. The moment he tries to run, he trips over his own garments. In the ancient world, girding the loins meant tucking in those robes to move quickly into battle or service. The Messiah doesn't need to put on righteousness as an afterthought. It is his very clothing. He is always ready for action, always prepared to defend the truth. Just as a heavy belt strengthens a warrior's core, this absolute commitment to truth and justice is what gives him the power to stand against the forces of chaos. This belt fundamentally redefines royalty. The Messiah is, in essence, a servant of the Creator and the people. His kingship is defined by his service, literally girding himself to do God's will. While other empires are held together by fragile political alliances or brute military strength, the Davidic king's belt, the very thing that holds his kingdom together and provides the ultimate stability of his throne, is simply his unshakable integrity. And every time you give someone the benefit of the doubt, every time you soften your own judgments with mercy, you are literally weaving this exact same belt, allowing redemption to move forward without tripping over the heavy tangled garments of human exile. Then, in verse 6, we reach the famous transformation of nature.
And the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them.
Are we talking about a literal petting zoo or something deeper? This is a massive software update to the universe. In deep internal readings, the wolf represents the spiritual force of harsh judgment, restriction, and predation. The lamb represents mercy, giving, and vulnerability. In our broken world, these forces tear each other apart. The wolf is our anger, the leopard is our impulsivity. In the future, we don't kill the wolf or the leopard, we elevate them. Their fiery passions are tamed and channeled to protect and lie down next to the gentle lamb. The harmonization continues in verse 7.
And the cow and bear shall feed, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox.
The bear represents heavy, sluggish depression, while the cow represents grounded, productive nourishment. The lion, the absolute king of the ego, the apex predator of our arrogance, will eat straw, meaning the massive energy of the human ego will no longer need to feed on the destruction of others. It will sustain itself on simple, humble truths. The ultimate psychological healing is revealed in verse 8.
And the sucking child shall play on the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the basilisk's den.
The viper, or asp, is the ultimate symbol of the toxic inner critic and venomous speech. In this completely redeemed state, the most innocent part of ourselves, the infant, can touch the deepest, darkest traumas and subconscious drives without being poisoned. The venom is gone. The psyche is completely whole. The reason for this peace is given in verse 9.
They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea.
This imagery of water is incredibly profound. Think about the nature of water. It naturally flows to the lowest possible places. It fills every crack, every crevice, and every hidden void. This means the knowledge of God won't just belong to the spiritual elite on the mountaintops. It will flow down and saturate the lowest, most mundane, and most broken parts of human society. And think of the ocean itself. Beneath the surface, there are millions of different creatures, all separate, all struggling to survive. But when you look at the sea from above, All you see is one unified flat surface of water. When the world is flooded with this undeniable spiritual clarity, our fractured egos and the illusion of separation simply vanish. We stop hurting and destroying each other, not because of some magical spell, but because it becomes spiritually and mathematically impossible to hurt someone else when you realize we are all submerged in the exact same divine reality. And it is precisely because this spiritual clarity begins to flood the earth that the eyes of the world shift. The nations realize their old ways are dead. This brings us to the pivot to modern history and global recognition in verse 10.
And it shall come to pass in that day, that the root of Jesse, that stands for an ensign of the peoples, unto him shall the nations seek, and his resting place shall be glorious.
But wait, we have to ask a profound question here. If he is now a global banner, why is he still called the root of Jesse? Shouldn't he finally get his royal title? Why not the King of David? The answer reveals a stunning shift in power. King David was a monarch who fought wars and sat on a visible political throne. Jesse, however, was a hidden righteous soul, a man ancient tradition says never sinned. By calling him the root of Jesse, the text emphasizes that this leader's power doesn't come from the political machinery of the Davidic monarchy, but from the primordial purity of Jesse. He is tapping into a light that is even deeper and older than King David himself. Mystically, he emerges from the lowest, most doubted places, the outer husks of exile, to prove that the Creator can extract the highest holiness from the most hidden origins. This is the ultimate cosmic rectification. It proves he is not some disconnected new creation, but the literal regrowth of the original stump that everyone assumed was dead. His true greatness comes precisely from the fact that he doesn't see himself as a self-made king, but simply as a humble branch of a divine root. The verse also promises that his resting place shall be glorious. This is a subtle but profound point. It refers specifically to his final resting state, or death, being ultimately honored by the world that once scorned him as a mere weed. And look at the reaction of the world. The verse says, "Unto him shall the nations seek." This marks a major shift in world history. The nations are not conquered by force. It is a voluntary submission. They realize that their own philosophies and empires have failed, so they willingly seek out the root of Jesse for the ultimate counsel we read about back in verse 2. Furthermore, what if this ensign or banner isn't just a single human being on a horse? What if the banner is the revived sovereign nation itself? The return of sovereignty to a chopped-down stump attracts the attention, and often the intense obsession, of the entire world. It is the ultimate signal that history is turning. The great ingathering begins in verse 11.
And it shall come to pass in that day, that the Lord will set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, that shall remain from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea.
The first time God reached out his hand was the exodus from Egypt. The second time is happening right now. This verse is not a mystical metaphor, it is a literal geographical blueprint of the 20th and 21st centuries. Let's look at this exact checklist and where these ancient names are on a modern map. Assyria covers modern-day northern Iraq and Syria. Egypt and Pathros refer to Lower and Upper Egypt, from where thriving ancient Jewish communities were forced to flee in the 1950s. Cush is Ethiopia. Think of the miraculous massive airlift operations like Operation Moses in 1984 and Operation Solomon in 1991 that brought Ethiopian Jews home. Elam is the ancient name for southwestern Iran, which saw a massive exodus following the 1979 revolution. Shinar is Iraq, representing the historic airlift of over 100,000 Babylonian Jews in 1950 and 1951. Hamath sits in modern-day Syria, a community that fled in the late 1940s, and the islands of the sea. That refers to the distant continents across the Mediterranean, the mass migrations from Europe following the devastation of 1945 and from the Americas. This is a historical checklist systematically ticked off over the last 100 years. The exiles literally returned from these precise locations. In verse 12, the visual signal to the world is established.
And he will set up an ensign for the nations, and will assemble the dispersed of Israel, and gather together the scattered of Judah from the four corners of the earth.
That ensign, or banner, is no longer just a hidden spiritual concept. It is a physical, undeniable reality, the raising of a literal flag in 1948. When the international community voted at the United Nations in 1947, they were unwittingly fulfilling this prophecy, formally recognizing the banner of a revived nation. It stands as a tangible geopolitical signal to the globe that the historical ingathering has officially begun, drawing people from the four corners of the earth back to their ancient center. The internal healing of the nation follows in verse 13.
The envy also of Ephraim shall depart, and they that harass Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim.
This promises an era where our deepest internal fractures cease. To fully grasp this, we have to look at another powerful vision from the prophet Ezekiel, who was commanded to take two distinct sticks, one for Ephraim and one for Judah, and join them together in his hand so they became one single piece of wood. Deep prophetic traditions explain that these represent two distinct forces of redemption. Ephraim represents the physical, secular builders of the land, the political, agricultural, and military framework. Judah represents the spiritual, religious core, the soul of the nation. For centuries, these two forces have been at odds, envying and vexing one another. But this verse guarantees a profound psychological shift. The physical builders and the spiritual visionaries will stop fighting. A geopolitical struggle on the borders is outlined in verse 14.
They shall fly upon the shoulders of the Philistines westward. Together they shall plunder the children of the east. Edom and Moab shall be under their hand, and the children of Ammon shall obey them.
Let's break down this stunning military imagery. The root of the word Philistines literally means raiders or invaders. They historically lived on the western coastal plain, specifically the Gaza Strip. The phrase, fly upon the shoulders, is not just poetic. It is a literal description of air superiority, a sudden, overwhelming strike from the sky. And what about the rest of the verse? Plundering the children of the east and taking hold of Edom, Moab, and Ammon. These ancient nations occupied the territories directly to the east and south. This was fully fulfilled in 1967 during the Six-Day War. In that conflict, an unprecedented preemptive airstrike, literally flying down from the sky on the Western Front, was followed by a lightning-fast campaign that secured the eastern and southern borders in less than a week. The text didn't just predict a general struggle. It perfectly described the modern military strategy of air superiority and the specific territorial victories of 1967. The miraculous crossing is detailed in verse 15.
And the Lord will utterly destroy the tongue of the Egyptian sea, and with his scorching wind will he shake his hand over the river, and will smite it into 7 streams, and cause men to march over dry shod.
How does a modern military conflict fulfill a 2,700-year-old prophecy? Modern rabbis point directly to the events of the 1973 Yom Kippur War. The tongue of the Egyptian Sea refers to the Suez Canal, where Israeli forces had to literally cross the water to secure victory in a dramatic counterattack. Now here is where the precision becomes almost impossible to dismiss. Look closely at the prophetic imagery. Smite it into 7 streams. To cross the canal, the military engineers laid down exactly 3 physical pontoon bridges. When you place 3 bridges across a body of water, it divides the water into exactly 4 flowing sections. 3 physical bridges plus 4 spaces of water equals exactly 7 streams. This perfectly precise engineering allowed the soldiers to literally march over dry shod directly into Africa. Furthermore, the second half of the verse mentions shaking his hand over the river, historically representing the Euphrates, or the Great Barrier of the North. In the modern era, this represents the sudden, unexpected collapse of the Iron Curtain in 1989. Hostile nations crumbled just long enough for the barriers to dry up, allowing over 1 million people to escape across ancient borders and return home. The final reality of this journey is secured in verse 16.
And there shall be a highway for the remnant of his people, that shall remain from Assyria, like as there was for Israel in the day that he came up out of the land of Egypt.
Where was the heart of ancient Assyria? It is the exact geographical territory of modern-day Iraq. For over 2.5 millennia, it was home to the oldest Jewish exile community in the world, dating all the way back to the destruction of the First Temple. Students of modern prophetic thought point to the breathtaking, literal fulfillment of this verse in the mid-20th century. Following the rebirth of the state, an actual logistical highway was formed. Through literal land routes stretching across the desert, and a massive highway in the sky during the historic airlifts of 1950 and 1951, over 120,000 Jews were brought directly out of Iraq. Just as the exodus from Egypt was a sudden, miraculous mass migration, this final highway from Assyria was a literal historical reality. The geographical and political barriers don't disappear through supernatural magic. They disappear through divinely guided natural history, bringing the oldest scattered pieces of the nation back home. Chapter 11 takes us from a dead stump to a global highway, from taming our inner demons to the literal ingathering of exiles on our evening news. I want everyone to understand the Edenic scent that bypasses the illusions of this world, and the belt of righteousness we weave with our own hands. Let me know in the comments which part of this prophetic blueprint resonated most with you. Until next time, remember, God has extended his hand a second time. We are not just studying ancient history, we are living inside the climax of the story.